Welcome to Camp Confidential, Beyond the Bars. I'm Katrina McLarin, and with my co-host Cheryl Womack, author, entrepreneur and philanthropist, we tell it like it is. In Season 1, we take you inside the walls of the Women's Federal Prison Camp. From pre-sentencing to navigating daily life behind bars, we offer practical advice, survival strategies and insights that no one tells you before you go in. No sugarcoating, no cliches. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Be sure to do your own research and consult a professional. Today's episode, Halfway But Not Home, is based off the book How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison by Cheryl Womack, available on Amazon. Halfway houses are owned and run by the Bureau of Prisons. Cheryl, in your case, you had to go to a halfway house to complete your time. Did you know how much time you'd have to do in a halfway house as you left prison?
No, I think the hardest part is, when you've left the prison, the camp, and you're going to the halfway house, they've been to your home to approve your home so that when you can get out, you're approved to go there. But you still have to meet a parole officer while you're there. I think you have to go through some screening and tests. A lot of people have to go to get a job. I was retired, so they couldn't make me get a job, even though I sort of had a job and, never really was supposed to stop. But I just didn't know how long I'd be there. And that was my greatest fear. I didn't know if I'd be there 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I just didn't know.
We sort of ended the last podcast that you're in the car and you've only got a limited amount of time that you have to be at the halfway house by. So your halfway house was located where in relation to the prison camp?
It was in Lansing, Kansas. So it's outside of Kansas City, about an hour from where I live. So it was a good 5 hours.
5 hours from the actual prison camp.
Yeah.
So your husband Dean's picked you up. You're driving there. You have a very quick drive through lunch. You pick up some basic necessities. Do you feel in that car ride that when on the way to the halfway house that you're free or that you have a sense of freedom?
Not at all. I mean, you're going to another place that I'm more afraid of than I was the camp. And yet again, I'm starting in a complete unknown. And now I'm sharing it with men and women.
So obviously at this point, you're actually quite nervous and quite scared. So what was your first impressions when you then pulled up at this halfway house? Talk us through it. What did it look like? I'm assuming it's like a little cottagey house somewhere. But I'm thinking not.
That would be a house. It was a big metal, silo building in front of the Lansing Federal Prison with barbed wires and all this. I mean, it looked horrifying behind it, but right in front of us, this giant metal building. And it's one story, but you walk in and there are, prisoners all over walking around the place, sitting outside smoking, and it's like a smoke-a-thon around there. And you walk up to this little thing, the door, and they open up a window for you and they ask your name and stuff. And then they hit a button to let you come in. And there's the only lock on the door, is that one place where they're going to enter you in. And then for most people, they do a urine test right when they go inside and they put you in the bathroom. And every time you come in from outside, they do a urine test for them. They looked at mine and I said, I don't have to do those. And of course they didn't believe it, but they looked it up and I didn't have to do those. But so you come in and you go into the office of whoever's managing it. And, they basically tell you, you're going to stay here with these women. There's no smoking in your room. There's no this or that or the other. Here's these forms that you need to fill out. It was sort of overwhelming because now you're planning your life and you have to fill out forms when you leave the property for every moment you're gone, what you're going to be, where you're going to be, what kind of car you're going to be in, what's the license number, a lot of details. And then you have to submit them in advance and get permission. Now, because I was getting there on a Monday, I think, they processed my stuff through pretty quickly for me to at least get some time. And by Tuesday, I think I stayed Monday night, and Tuesday I got permission to get out at 4:00 in the afternoon and stay out to 8:00 at night to have dinner with my family.
Tell me that first night that you're staying there and you're taken to, I'm assuming it's like a dorm situation. Are the women separated from men? I'm assuming. How does that work?
Right. So there's a bunch of doors. There's long hallways and there's a bunch of doors. And then when you open the door to the women's area, you go back in and you see just a huge room that's got all these bunk beds in it. Same, just like prison, the metal, nasty bunk beds and the same little lockers that they have beside them. And then when you go around the corner, they have this open concrete area with just old showers, old nasty showers with that you pull a plastic screen across and stools on the other side. And all the girls sat in the shower area and smoked their brains out because they wanted to smoke, and you're not supposed to smoke in your rooms. You're not supposed to smoke in the building. And so they'd be in there smoking, all trying to, have it not be right by the doors where somebody could tell that they were smoking. I was lucky that I got a lower bunk, and you just sort of had to listen and sit around them and stuff because some of them knew each other. I mean, I listened to one woman the very first day I was in there on the phone, and she was trying to help pay rent with her family where she was trying to go with. And she was explaining to the person on the other side of the phone that she'd already given blood, I think twice that day, and could not give it anymore. And having that person go give blood so they'd come up with enough money for rent. It just, it's so sad to see some of the tragedies of life that are unfolding and how little they have. And now it's November, it's almost November and it's cold out and she didn't have a coat. Most of them didn't have coats. I'm just surprised at you don't have but what you've come out of there with. And the winter coat that you had in prison, you have to turn back in. So if you didn't have a personal winter coat to have, you don't have a winter coat. You have to go buy one somehow or hope somebody in your family brings you one. So I found myself bringing coats from home. After I went on my first day, I took a bunch of extra ones out and brought them back in because I felt so bad for those people.
Tell me, are the men locked off separately from the women?
There's no locking off. They're in separate rooms. I because there's 185 and you're saying about, 90 of them are men, then there's all these other rooms and dorms. And then like if you had lunch, the women would go to have their lunch on one shift and then the men would have their lunch, but you might cross paths with each other. They acted like you weren't supposed to cross paths with each other, but when you went out the one locked door to get in, they're all sitting out in the front hallway and they're all sitting outside. You could register and get a car if you had a car and register with them so you could drive when you got permission to be out. So you could do that. I wasn't going to get a car registered. I was just going to wait till my husband came and got me for whatever I was going to do.
So you didn't feel safe at all being surrounded by, very ranging convicted felons from all sorts of things. And it sounds to me, unless I'm misunderstanding this, but it doesn't sound like there's wardens walking around or guards making sure that everything's in order. It sounds like it's a lot more relaxed. So integration's possible.
Right. There's supposed to be guards walking around, but they mostly sat up at the front. Sometimes they would come around and more, it seemed like they came around more to try to catch somebody smoking. They're always talking about a couple of people sneaking off and getting together and things like that and trying to figure out how to keep them separated. But even when like the weekend would come up there, you'd have the men running up and down the corridors going party because they'd figure out how to drink and, do drugs. And just, it was not, there was really not much managed there. It was a free for all.
So let's talk about the first time that you find out you're in the halfway house. You still don't know how much time you kind of have to be there, but you can apply to be able to go home the first time you're able to go home. So what's that process like?
You fill out some paperwork to give to your counselor that you're assigned. And the first time, the only thing you can do is get out, from like 4 to 8 p.m. You can go out for a dinner and you have to be back in by 8 o'clock. After the second time, and I didn't understand the time sequence yet, but the second time, or eventually you can get an overnight. And you have to do a dinner and an overnight before you can get a weekend pass. So, I'm in that first week and trying to figure out how to pull all that off. So, I sat down and wrote out for everything day one, and then you have to wait and see if they approve you or not. And then you have to have a cell phone, like I said, to even get out of there. But you mostly have a cell phone because they're going to call you at any time that you're off premise and they're going to ask you where you are. And you better be where they say you are. Because again, I don't know if they know how to monitor whether where the phone is or what they know how to do about it, but they check in with you and you better pick up that phone. And the other thing you have to go for a home visit is that you have to have a landline. So I had given up landlines in the last few years and had gone completely to mobile phones in our house. And we had to reinstall a landline so that when they called on the landline, I could answer the phone. And I would be in my house and they knew I was in my house because they called a landline.
So when you're submitting your paperwork, I'm assuming that you have to be quite strict on that I'm going to point A to point B and that's it. There's no deviation in between allowed. Is that correct?
If you want to say you're going to the grocery store on the way, then you have to say, I'm going here. This is the name of the You literally have to take a phone book and look up the addresses and put addresses and phone numbers to every place you're going. If you're going to Target, if you're going to work, if you're going to go to a restaurant, everywhere that you're going to go, and then they can come back in and take off what you're not going to do and approve the rest of it. Basically, I was mostly just going to go home. And I think even when I was home the first night for my dinner, then I just had my sons come over and we all had dinner there.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So that first night or afternoon that you arrive home, who's there to meet you and what were the emotions like that particular day?
Well, my two sons for sure showed up to greet me and have dinner with me. And my husband made dinner for all of us. And it was just, it was so great to see them, and it's a little bit teary-eyed, and hard to see them. But I think the hardest part for me was that I knew I couldn't even stay overnight. I knew I couldn't stay, and by 8 o'clock at night, then I had to be back, somewhere I hated being. And so I think it had a lot of impact on how much I enjoyed that first visit, even though I was so happy to see them and so happy that I knew I was working my way in that process. What bothered me the most was I'm still can't even stay here and see you. I can't get in my own bed and sleep tonight. I can't any of that.
So you can't really relax and enjoy it because you're also scared about where you're going to have to go and spend the night back at the halfway house.
Right. And I'd already spent one night there. So the first time I get an afternoon outing, I've had one night there. I mean, it's okay. It's there's more yelling and loud noises and people, you've got curfews, but people don't really watch them the way they are. People are on phones, so they're on the phones all the time. It's a lot louder, and loud doesn't bother me, but it's just a lot more chaotic than even camps in prison are. So chaotic they'd get in trouble. And literally the first 10-minute walks I ever had where you can go from place to place for 10-minute walks. I don't think my first one, but maybe the second time I ever had 10-minute walks was inside a halfway house where they pretty much locked the place down and said, we're on 10-minute walks. And you had to get to where you were going to be in the first 10 minutes of the hour and stay there until the rest of that hour was over before you could move again.
So when you're in the halfway house, I'm assuming you're allocated some type of counsellor that sees you through that process there and explains all the different rules, regulations, or what happened there. Because most of the emphasis is getting a job, right? But of course you didn't need to.
Right. And so, I met a counselor and we just sort of looked at each other because she goes, well, at 68, 69, you're probably not looking for a job. And I went, no. And she said, they have to financially find out, can you support yourself as everybody? So you have to get into a little bit of your finances and stuff with them to know you're going to be. And I said, I'm on Social Security eventually when I get it back. And so we just talked a little bit and I really didn't get much of her time other than to process and learn how to do paperwork and just get to know her a little bit because I wasn't getting a job. I wasn't going to go to any of the meetings for job counseling. I wasn't going to go on any of the interviews where they take a bus full of people and take them on interviews. I wasn't going to do any of that. So my time was going to be there at the halfway house, or could I get out?
When you're in the halfway house, you talked before about the woman that shockingly the only way she could derive income was to give blood. Are all your benefits cut still, or are you able to apply for some type of government aid while you're in a halfway house?
No, because you're still under Bureau of Prisons. They want you to get a job and you can earn income, but I think that your money gets paid to them and they pay you. I think there's a cost to the halfway house for some of the things they do around a job. But I can't tell you that for sure because I didn't do it. So there may not be a cost, but they manage your money. They put you on a budget. They tell you what you can spend, what you can't spend, what your restitution is going to be. They manage every tiny detail of your life. If you've got to get a job and you're reentering into society. Again, I was fortunate that I had a good place to go. I had income, I had family, and I didn't need any of those things to reenter. So I bypassed and really didn't have the learning curve that a lot of girls would have. But it didn't take anything to see they had nothing. And some of these people who are sitting here in Lansing, Kansas, might be going to Oklahoma or Wyoming when they got out of there, go to their next home. It was far away and they didn't have proper clothing and they didn't have a pot to piss in. They didn't have anything. It was sad.
So you think by the time you're in the halfway house, you're on the bottom rung now. You're not really, you probably had it better in prison, right?
Absolutely. It was nicer in prison. It was better in prison. They couldn't smoke, so you didn't smell like a stack house all the time because you couldn't get away from it. You really barely wanted to take a shower there. I always wanted to wait to get home to take a shower because it was really a lot more public to take a shower. And I mean, they had no locks on the doors. We didn't want to walk around in a towel and come out and suddenly have somebody burst into the room. And, every now and then they'd have 2 or 3 men. They still did counts at 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So they'd come bursting through at 10 o'clock and you'd have to stand by your bed. But it was just I think it was an awkward experience. I was out and even I think for Halloween, I'd gotten home by Halloween. Now you can order food in. If you could afford it, you can order a pizza in or something like that. So I remember telling my husband I was actually home for good by October 31. And I remember sending pizzas to all the girls and some Cokes and stuff, just a whole bunch of pizzas and desserts and stuff, because there's not much they can get. They're still building everything back up. And, again, for a lot of them, they're still looking for a drug score. They're looking for alcohol they can get or sneaking it in and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's a more lawless place, even though it's supposed to have the same kind of rules and you're right in front of a huge penitentiary that's daunting. It's pretty lawless. And it just didn't feel safe to walk around at the exterior of it where there weren't guards.
I can't blame you for that. Tell me the first night that you get to spend at home in your own home in your own bed, what was that like for you?
Well, it was wonderful to get to lay in my own bed and actually touch my husband know that I'm going to wake up and see his face in the morning. And so the way it works is when you start getting time out, there's a process that I didn't understand. It took me a minute to figure out, but you first have to get an outing to go out till 8 o'clock at night or for an afternoon or whatever that's going to be. Then you have to get a pass to get out, and you can do an overnight. Not necessarily are those supposed to be real close sequenced, but I was very fortunate to do mine like a day apart. I'd do a day in, a day out. And then until you get your afternoon out and until you get your overnight out, you cannot get a weekend pass. So we had a weekend coming up, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to work on getting out of here. Here comes the weekend, and I'm not going to spend the weekend in here. There's nothing to do. There is nothing to do. There's not TV. You've got your phone. There's just nothing to do. And I mean, I'm not used to being on a phone, playing games, doing anything. I haven't had a phone, for 15 months. The phone's not anything big to me by now, so I'm just sitting there going, this is the longest days of my life. And, so I got my overnight, and I woke up in bed with my husband. And again, I think when you're going for those short periods of time, the hardest part for me was I had to go back. It was just devastating to me that the time just went so fast and was so limited, and I could barely be there, and I was out the door, and everybody tells you you've changed and you're quieter and stuff. And you are quieter because you're just taking everything in. You're trying to figure out, what does this feel like now? I haven't been here in so long.
Did you find that things had changed while you'd gone?
Really not at all. It's like if somebody hit a pause button waiting for me to get back to start making decisions to do a lot of things, and things had been maintained adequately for a status quo, but if anything was going to improve, I needed to be back to get it improved. So
So you
from
didn't
that standpoint, no, not really. I mean, now I didn't really have many people come over and see me because I didn't know how that would fly between. The other thing that happens when you're in the halfway house is, before a lot of this happens too, you've got to be assigned your new parole person. You don't have to meet them, but the supervisor of the parole for the regular outside with the judicial system comes in and assigns and tells you who you're going to meet. And then after you get out, and I think I was all the way out by the time I had to drive down to the courthouse and go meet that person and check in and let them know who I was.
Did you find that your family members or your husband had changed in some ways while you were your first time back?
I
The
don't think
change,
they
maybe not just with you, but with them?
I think they changed. I think they worried about me. And I think I've alluded to it before, but when you spent 15 months with this experience, a traumatic experience, unusual experience, you want to talk about it. And all everybody would say is, you're home now, so let's just put it behind you. You're home. Let's put it behind you. Let's don't talk about it. And I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to, I think it really bothered them that I would tell them stories about things that happened in camp, and good things, bad things, everything. And they just wanted me to stop talking about it. So I think that bothered them, and it bothered me that bothered them.
When did you find out that you were actually going to be released home? When did that happen?
Well, this was another sad. I mean, they were just the gift that kept on giving. So I worked out how to get the very first weekend into a weekend pass. And so I'm going home, and whoever the head person was had made arrangements for me to get out Monday. So technically they were supposed to let me know when I left Friday night that I didn't have to come back, that they were going to come see the house, but nobody told me. So I came back Sunday night for the weekend pass, had to stay overnight. And then when the woman came in the morning, she goes, "Oh, you're not supposed to be here. You know how horrified you are that you've spent another day somewhere you don't have to be?" I was horrified. I was, then I'm calling my husband going, "Wherever you are, come and get me now." And so he couldn't come and get me. The two women that do site inspections said, "We'll just take you to your home, and then we'll have to tour your home." So I literally rode home with their version of guards for site inspection women, and two of them are just, Laurel and Hardy. They're just, put you in the car and off you go. And it's partly what their job was, to go to people's homes and inspect them ongoing, when they went home a little bit. As long as they doing the visitations and stuff, not when they got under parole with the judicial system, but as long as you're with the BOP going out and doing visitation, they're also the people that might drive by your job and make sure you're really at the job where you said you are. I mean, that's what was their job, was to see, are these things really happening? You have a doctor's appointment, you say it's at this time. Well, one of them might be sitting at the dentist office waiting to see if you come in, because that's where you said you were going to be. They check.
So tell me, when they took you home that Monday, did they walk through the house? What do they do? What does the inspection entail?
They require that you walk them through every part of your house, every single part of your house. And I have a pretty big house, so it did some walking. And, I don't have a normal house from somebody who's been relatively successful. So it was intimidating for them because I don't think they've been in many houses like that. And you're just trying to be, this is my house and this is where I am. And I also have a lot of inventory stacked up from being in between this kind of business I'm in, going to that kind of a business, so you could see there's a lot of stuff sitting around. Plus, you have to list every person that lives in that house or is in that house. And so my assistant worked out of the house, so they had to meet her. My son and his wife lived there, so they had to meet them. They're just like, who are all these people? And it's like, well, I could have been in a house with 5 people. And the other thing is that I think is hard is if you're going to your home, let's say your brother's on paper and this is the only home you've got to go to. They're not supposed to release you to let you go home where somebody else is on paper. So the place that you have to go, that would be your safe place to go. If somebody else got there first, could not be where you're going. And you're going to be in the halfway house longer because you don't have a place to go without somebody on paper.
And for people that didn't have your resources, that could be very, very difficult.
Really hard.
The emphasis, obviously, when you're in the halfway house is go get a job. What do they do? What did you observe that they did to help inmates get a job?
Well, they posted on the bulletin board all the $13 jobs an hour that were available. And I saw that they had one van that for maybe the girls too, but certainly for the guys, drove to one particular factory where they all went together and came back together. So I saw they had that. But I know they had a couple classes, some in the future and one while I was there, to talk to you about job orientation. But there really was nothing there that was really structurally helpful. There's nothing there talking about how to balance a checkbook. Now, you had to sit down with them and do a budget. So you would be going through and saying, what's your paycheck and what are you netting? And, mostly they want you to get a job so they get you on a budget. And mostly they want you to do that so they can figure out what kind of restitution you can pay.
Do you have to do a budget as a part of your release?
No, because I didn't know any restitution. I didn't know anybody, anything. So all these parts I'd handled up front so that I wouldn't be dealing with those later, which is not normal.
The emphasis on getting a job is obviously when you're released, they have to have somewhere to go, as you said, that was approved. Now, your experience was that a lot of apartments and that won't rent to convicted felons.
Absolutely. There are a lot of places that won't employ you. I think more people employ you now, but still a lot of them won't, and certainly not for more professional jobs is just very difficult. I mean, it's one of those things I'd like to see improve and change. A lot of apartments won't rent. I mean, it's right on their applications. Have you ever been convicted? Are you a felon? And I can't tell you how many times I've watched something where they're teaching people about real estate and they're saying, I make sure they've got this much times their salary and that they haven't been a felon. You're just like, oh boy. I mean, it's just you're up against it. And then you've got to get a checking account. You may not have a checking account established and, so that you can cash your paychecks and things like, I mean, you're just starting over and setting. And I guess the other part I want to point out is that, again, you're institutionalized. Depending upon how long you've been there is how much more you're institutionalized. You're not used to making any decisions because if you made decisions, more often than not, you were wrong. Even if you were right, you were going to be wrong because they're going to tell you what to do and when you're going to do it. Suddenly you come out and instantly they want you to be able to make these life-changing decisions. And they almost look at you and treat you like, well, are you a dummy? Why can't you get a job? Why can't you this and that? Well, I mean, I think you're sort of afraid of your shadow a little bit when you're first out because it's all very uncomfortable to you. I mean, you're just in a completely different environment. If you've been there for a while and you're used to this little tiny space that you live in, and then I go here and I come back from here, the rest of the world, I mean, the noises, the changing in technology, all of those things were overwhelming for those women, and the men, just overwhelming for them. It's like, you're not just coming out and driving a car, but the phone, I mean, you could have been in long enough that you haven't seen the latest technology in a phone. You don't know how to use a laptop. There are just a lot of things you're on an old fashioned push button payphone when you're in prison. You're not using mobile anything. Remember, I told you they might have technology in there and they lock the door and let you use it. So now you're not using a keyboard. So what are they doing to help get you ready for it? Nothing. And suddenly you have to come out and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and say, I got to get a job. And so what do? They'll think I'm going to go do manual labor. I'm going to go work in a factory.
Do you think that one of the biggest issues is that they're closing down so many halfway houses? And if you don't have one to go to, you're stuck inside still. 2 prongs to this, the actual closing down of the halfway houses. And do you think the halfway houses are fit for purpose?
I can't speak to other halfway houses, but when talking to the girls while still at the camp, I didn't hear anything good about halfway houses. I just didn't hear anything good about them. I mean, when I looked looked at the employees who were there, most of them were just doing their job. Partly, like even if you look at my counselor, she had way too many cases to manage to do anything very helpful for anybody. I mean, I was almost a nuisance to her because there was nothing for her to do for me other than to get my papers signed, so I could get out of there. So I was really trying to figure out how to get in there and make sure I had my stuff in time before she left at the end of the day. So she had a few days to process and get me out of there. And the whole time I was in there, somebody's constantly opened the door and butting in. And I mean, she's a very busy girl. And there were just 2 case managers in there, counselors, dealing with all those people that were in there. And so that's part of a process is, do you make enough noise to get seen? You're just learning a whole different lifestyle, but you're still coming back to a crappy camp when it's all said and done. And it's not a home. It's not like a house. I think some of them could be old houses. I think there was one in Kansas City, Missouri that would have been much closer that shut down like 2 months before I got out.
Thank you for listening to How to Go to Camp with Katrina McLarin and Cheryl Womack. For more support, check out the Women of Worth website, www.womenofworth.wow.org, where you'll find helpful resources, including Cheryl's books, Mummy Loves You Everywhere, and How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison. Whether you're preparing for the journey or supporting someone through it, remember, there's guidance, hope, and a community ready to help you navigate this path.